The sound of Wade's BMW pulling into my driveway made my stomach clench. 3 months had passed since our last conversation, and he only visited when he needed something. I was arranging fresh lilies in the crystal vase when I heard the car doors slam. Through the window, I watched my son emerge, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. Brittany followed, her heels clicking against the pavement as she smoothed her blonde hair. Even from a distance, I could see the determined set of her jaw. Whatever they were here for, she was driving it. The doorbell rang twice, sharp and impatient. I set down the vase and strolled to the front door, my heart already preparing for disappointment. "Mom," Wade said curtly when I opened the door, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Brittany swept past me, her overwhelming perfume filling the small entryway. She carried a leather briefcase which she clutched like a weapon. "Hello, Agatha," she said with that fake sweetness that always made my skin crawl. I led them to the living room where Wade had taken his first steps 35 years ago. Now he stood in the center like a stranger, arms crossed, looking at everything except me. "Can I get you coffee?" "I just made a fresh pot," I offered, trying to maintain some normalcy. "This isn't a social visit," Wade said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Sit down, Mom. There's something you need to know." My legs felt weak as I sank into my favorite armchair, the one Harold and I had picked out together 40 years ago. Brittany sat across from me, opening her briefcase with deliberate precision. Wade remained standing, towering over both of us. "The company is sold," he announced as if discussing the weather. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean sold?" Brittany pulled out a thick stack of papers, setting them on the coffee table between us. "The sale went through yesterday morning. Wade has been handling all the paperwork for months." I stared at the documents, my vision blurring. The company Harold and I had built from nothing, the one that had provided for our family for decades, was gone. "But I'm still the majority shareholder," I whispered. Wade let out a harsh laugh. "Mom, you haven't been involved in day-to-day operations for 3 years. Not since Dad died. You don't even understand the financials anymore." "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded small. "Look at you," Brittany interjected, gesturing with her manicured nails. "You can barely manage this house. Bills pile up on your kitchen counter for weeks. You forget appointments. Just last month, you called Wade 3 times in one day asking about the same thing." Heat rose in my cheeks. It was true, I'd been calling Wade more frequently since Harold's death, not because I was confused, but because I was lonely. I missed having someone to share decisions with. Wade pulled up a chair directly in front of me. "Mom, you're 64 years old. You've been struggling since Dad passed. The company needs young leadership, fresh ideas. I can't keep watching you run it into the ground." "The company is profitable," I said, my voice stronger now. The quarterly reports show what Dad set up years ago," Wade interrupted. "But the industry is changing. Technology, automation, digital marketing. You don't understand any of that." Brittany nodded sympathetically. "We're not trying to hurt you, Agatha. We're trying to protect you. The buyer paid well above market value. The money will keep you comfortable for the rest of your life." I looked between them, searching for any sign of the son I'd raised, the boy who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. Instead, I saw a man who looked at me with barely concealed impatience. "How much?" I asked quietly. Wade and Brittany exchanged a glance. $2.8 million. After taxes and fees, you'll have about $1.9 million in your account by Friday. It was a good price. Better than good. But the money wasn't the point. "You sold our company without even asking me." "I'm asking you now," Wade said, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. "I'm asking you to sign these papers, making it official, to acknowledge that the sale was in your best interest." Brittany leaned forward. "Think about it, Agatha. No more board meetings. No more worrying about employee problems or market fluctuations. You can focus on what matters, your garden, your book club, maybe some travel." Wade stood abruptly, pacing to the window. When he turned back, his face was hard. "The truth is, Mom, you're a burden. You have been ever since Dad died. You call me constantly with questions that any competent business owner should know. You second-guess every decision I make, even though you don't understand the modern marketplace." The word, burden, hung in the air like smoke. I felt something inside me crack. Not break exactly, but crack like ice beginning to thaw. "I sold Dad's company because it was the right thing to do," Wade continued. For the business, for the employees, and you. Good luck with the rent on your new apartment, because this house is going to cost more to maintain than you can afford on a fixed income. Brittany shot him a warning look, but he ignored my son. I said softly, more to myself than to him. And you're my mother, he replied. Which is why I'm doing this. Someone has to make the hard decisions, and it's not going to be you. I sat in that chair for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My mind was strangely calm. When I finally looked up, both Wade and Brittany were watching me expectantly. Okay, I said simply. Good luck. Wade blinked. What? I said okay. Good luck. I stood slowly smoothing my skirt. I assume you'll need me to sign those papers. Where? Brittany fumbled with the documents, clearly expecting more of a fight. Here and here, an initial there. I signed where they indicated, my handwriting steady despite the tremor I felt inside. When I finished, I handed the pen back to Brittany and walked toward the front door. That's it? Wade called after me. You're not going to argue. Not going to guilt-trip me about family loyalty. I turned back to face him, my hand on the doorknob. Would it change anything? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I didn't think so, I said. Have a wonderful time in Milan. I hope the weather is nice for your honeymoon. Brittany's eyes widened. How did you know about Milan? I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. I know more than you think I do? After they left, I sat back down in my armchair and looked around the living room. Everything was the same as it had been an hour ago, yet everything had changed. The silence felt different now, not lonely, but expectant like the moment before dawn. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Marcus? It's Agatha. I think it's time we had that conversation. Marcus arrived within the hour, carrying the same worn leather satchel he'd been using since I first met him 25 years ago. My longtime attorney and friend looked exactly as I expected. Concerned, but not surprised. I take it Wade went through with it, he said, settling into Harold's old chair without ceremony. Every word exactly as we predicted. I poured him coffee from the pot I'd made earlier. My hands steadier now than they'd been in months. He called me a burden, Marcus. His exact words. Marcus shook his head. I'm sorry, Agatha. I know we prepared for this. But it still must have hurt. I sat across from him, cradling my cup. The hurt stopped surprising me years ago. What surprises me is how predictable he's become. Shall we review the timeline? Marcus asked, pulling out a thick folder. I nodded, though I knew every detail by heart. We'd been planning this for 3 years, ever since Harold's funeral, when Wade had pulled me aside and suggested I might want to simplify my business responsibilities. It started in 1983, I began. Harold and I were both 25, fresh out of college, and completely broke. I had a business degree and a head full of ideas. He had charisma and the ability to charm investors. Marcus smiled. The classic combination. Except everyone assumed Harold was the brains of the operation. I set down my coffee cup. The bank loans were approved because of his charm. The early partnerships happened because men in the 80s were more comfortable dealing with other men. So we played the game. I walked to the mahogany desk in the corner, pulling out a framed photograph from the bottom drawer. It showed Harold and me at the ribbon cutting for our first office building. He was holding the scissors, beaming at the camera. I was standing slightly behind him, my hand on his shoulder, smiling but watching the crowd. I was always watching, I said, more to myself than to Marcus. While Harold worked the room, I was calculating. Who had real influence, who was just talking big, which deals would materialize. And the company structure. Marcus prompted. Officially, Harold owned 60% and I owned 40%. But the real power was in the subsidiary companies, the holding trusts, the intellectual property rights. All things I set up and managed while Harold focused on the public face of the business. I opened another drawer, filled with documents Wade had never seen. When Wade joined the company 8 years ago, Harold was already showing signs of his heart condition. We knew we needed to plan for succession. Marcus pulled out his reading glasses. That's when you establish the Meridian Trust. Exactly. I felt a familiar satisfaction remembering how carefully we'd constructed it. 70% of the company's actual value. The patents, the international contracts, the commercial real estate holdings, was transferred to a trust with me as the sole beneficiary. The remaining 30%, which included the day-to-day operations and the company name, stayed in the traditional corporate structure. And Wade knew none of this. I laughed. But there was no humor in it. Wade knew what he wanted to know. He was so eager to prove himself, to show that he could run things better than his old-fashioned parents. He never asked the right questions. They danced like tiny secrets. I remembered another afternoon, almost exactly a year ago, when I'd overheard Wade on the phone in Harold's old office. "He was talking to Brittany?" I said. "She was asking about the company's assets, about whether I had any real control over the finances." Wade laughed and said I was just a figurehead, that I'd never understood the business side of things. Marcus made a note on his legal pad. "That's when you decided to accelerate the timeline." That's when I realized my son had never really known me at all. The first call came at exactly 9:47 a.m. Milan time, 2:47 a.m., where I sat in my kitchen, wide awake, with a cup of chamomile tea. I'd been counting down the hours, knowing that Wade and Brittany would try to access their funds first thing after their arrival. I let it ring. The second call came 3 minutes later, then another. By the fifth call, my phone was vibrating so aggressively it nearly fell to the floor. I picked it up on the sixth ring. "Hello, Wade." "Mom." His voice was strained, panic barely contained. "There's a problem with the bank accounts. Some kind of technical issue. The funds from the sale aren't showing up." I took a slow sip of my tea. "That's strange. Have you called the bank?" "Of course I called the bank." The veneer was cracking. "They said the account was closed yesterday afternoon." "Closed, Mom?" "How does an account just close itself?" "I wouldn't know, dear. Banking is my area of expertise, as you've reminded me many times." There was a pause, and I could hear Brittany's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. Wade covered the phone, but I could still make out her words. "Tell her to fix it. Now." "Mum." Wade's voice was back, more controlled but with an edge I'd never heard before. "I need you to call Marcus. There's been some kind of mistake with the paperwork. The sale money should have been deposited yesterday." "I'll call him in the morning," I said pleasantly. "It's nearly 3 a.m. here, Wade. I'm sure whatever it is can wait until business hours." "No, it can't wait." The control snapped completely. "We're in Milan, Mom. We have reservations, plans. I paid for a suite at one of the most expensive hotels in Europe. Our cards aren't working either." I made a sympathetic clicking sound. "That does sound inconvenient. I hope you brought some cash for emergencies." The line went quiet except for Wade's increasingly ragged breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously low. "Mom, I'm going to ask you once more, and I need you to listen very carefully. Call Marcus right now and find out where our money is." "Our money," I repeated slowly. "I wasn't aware that you and I had any joint accounts." "Wade, the money from the sale, my inheritance, the 2.8 million that should be in my account right now." I set down my teacup with deliberate care. "Oh, that money?" "Yes, I know exactly where that is." "Thank God," I heard him exhale. "So call Marcus sound?" "It's in my account," I said simply. "Where it's always been. Where will it stay?" The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Wade's voice came back, barely above a whisper. "What did you say?" "I said the money is in my account, where it's always been, where it will stay." The explosion was immediate. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I sold the company. I have the paperwork. You signed it yourself." "Yes, you did sell the company. And yes, I did sign the papers. You sold 30% of Herald Industries for 2.8 million. Quite a good price for what you owned, all things considered." I could hear Brittany now, her voice getting closer to the phone. "What is she saying, Wade? What is she talking about?" "Mom," Wade's voice was shaking now. "Stop playing games. You can't do this. The company was Dad's. It's mine now. The company name was your father's, yes. And the daily operations, the employee payroll, the office lease in downtown Austin. All of that was yours to sell, and you did. Congratulations. Then where?" His voice cut off abruptly, and I knew he was beginning to understand. "Where are the assets?" I finished for him. "The patents, the international contracts, the commercial real estate, the manufacturing rights. Those were never part of what you inherited, dear. Those were always mine." The phone clattered and I heard Brittany's voice now. "Give me that phone. Mrs. Holloway, this is Brittany. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Hello, Brittany? How's the weather in Milan?" "Never mind the weather. Wade is telling me you're claiming ownership of assets that rightfully belong to him." "That's not legally possible. I've seen the incorporation papers." "You've seen some incorporation papers," I corrected. The ones Wade wanted you to see. Tell me, did you happen to review the Meridian Trust documents? Or the Patterson Holdings subsidiary? Or perhaps the intellectual property assignments filed with the state of Delaware? The silence told me everything I needed to know. I didn't think so, I continued. You see, Brittany, when you spend 40 years building a business, you learn to protect your interests. You learn that sometimes the most important assets are the ones that aren't written on the letterhead. Wade's voice came back on the line, and now there was fear there. Mom, I'm your son. We're family. Yes, we are family. Which is why you felt comfortable calling me a burden and selling what you thought was my life's work without even consulting me. I stood from the kitchen table and walked to the window, looking out at the sunrise beginning to paint the sky pink. Tell me, Wade, did you think I was so senile that I wouldn't know what you were planning? Planning. I wasn't planning anything. I was trying to help you. You were trying to help yourself to what you thought was an easy inheritance. The difference is that you were counting on me being the helpless old woman you've convinced yourself I am. Brittany grabbed the phone again. This is elder abuse. We're going to sue you for everything you have. I laughed. A genuine sound of amusement. With what money, dear? And which lawyers? The ones you haven't paid yet because you're standing in a hotel lobby in Milan without access to funds. We'll figure it out, Wade said, back on the line. I'll call everyone I know. I'll call Dad's old business partners. They'll loan me the money to fight this. You mean the business partners whose contracts are now void because the company they partnered with no longer exists in any meaningful form? I asked. Or perhaps you mean the ones who are currently negotiating new, more lucrative deals with Meridian Trust. The sound that came through the phone was something between a growl and a sob. You planned this. You planned all of this. I corrected. There's a difference. I hoped you would prove me wrong. I hoped you would show me that you valued our relationship more than what you could take from me. I do value our relationship. No, Wade. You value what you thought our relationship could get you. There's a difference there, too. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen making coffee for two, a routine that had become as natural as breathing. The morning sun streamed through windows that sparkled. Wade had cleaned them yesterday as part of his weekly responsibilities. The house had never looked better or felt more peaceful. Good morning, Mom. Wade appeared in the doorway, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. The designer suits were long gone, sold months ago to help pay for necessities. Good morning. How did you sleep? Better than I have in years. He moved to the cabinet and pulled out 2 mugs, a gesture that had become automatic. I finished reviewing the quarterly reports last night. The German partnership is exceeding projections by 18%. I smiled, handing him his coffee. Black. The way he'd learned to drink it when expensive coffee makers and fancy creamers were no longer in the budget. And the Tokyo expansion. The contracts should be finalized by the end of the month. Your instincts about the market timing were perfect. It had taken Wade 3 months to stop being bitter about working for his mother instead of inheriting her company. It had taken another 2 months for him to realize he was learning more about business than he ever had when he thought he was entitled to success. The transformation hadn't been easy or pretty. After Brittany left him at the hotel that night, Wade had spent 2 weeks sleeping on friends' couches, trying to borrow money for lawyers to contest the trust. One by one, his friends had stopped returning his calls when they realized he had no way to pay them back. Wade had finally shown up on my doorstep 3 weeks later, exhausted and humbled, asking if my offer of the spare room was still available. I'll pay the $50 a night, he'd said, standing on the porch with a single suitcase. And I'll do the housework. I just need somewhere to stay while I figure out what comes next. What comes next is up to you, I'd told him. But if you're staying here, you follow my rules. The rules had been simple but non-negotiable: no drinking, no drugs, no overnight guests without permission. Rent paid weekly in advance. Household chores are assigned and completed without complaint. Most importantly, if he wanted to be part of the family business again, he would start at the bottom and work his way up based on merit, not bloodline. I have a meeting with the Henderson Group this afternoon, I said now, settling at the kitchen table with my coffee. Would you like to sit in? Wade's eyes lit up. Really? They're one of our biggest potential clients. They're also notoriously difficult to work with. I thought you might learn something from watching how to handle demanding customers." 6 months ago, Wade would have bristled at the suggestion that he needed to learn anything. Now, he nodded eagerly. "I'd appreciate that. Should I prepare anything in advance? Review their file. Study their previous partnerships. Think about why they might be hesitant to work with us and how we might address those concerns." "Already done," Wade said, pulling out a notebook filled with his handwriting. "I stayed up until midnight researching their corporate culture and recent market challenges." I felt a familiar warmth in my chest, the same feeling I'd had when Wade was 8 years old and had spent hours building an elaborate Lego castle, determined to get every detail perfect. He looked up from his notebook, surprised. "You are?" "I am. When you first came back, I wasn't sure if you were here because you genuinely wanted to change or just because you had nowhere else to go. Honestly, at first, it was because I had nowhere else to go." Wade's face reddened slightly. "I spent those weeks on couches planning how I was going to prove you wrong. How I was going to get back what I thought was mine. It took me a while to realize that what I thought was mine was never really mine to begin with." "And now?" Wade set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me. "Now I realize that I wasted the first 35 years of my life trying to live up to an image of Dad that wasn't even real. I thought being a man meant taking what I wanted and never asking for help. I thought strength meant never admitting when I was wrong. And what do you think now? I think Dad was successful because he was smart enough to marry someone smarter than him and humble enough to listen to her advice." Wade's voice was steady, serious. "I think I missed out on 35 years of learning from the most capable person I know because I was too arrogant to see past my assumptions." That afternoon's meeting with the Henderson group went better than I'd hoped. Wade asked intelligent questions, took detailed notes, and offered insights that showed he'd done his homework. When they asked about our succession planning, I was able to point to Wade as our Director of Operations, a title he'd earned through 6 months of 60-hour weeks and flawless performance. After the clients left, Wade and I sat in the conference room reviewing the notes. "I think they're gonna sign," he said, organizing his papers. "I think so too. That was excellent work today." Wade smiled, but then his expression grew serious. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you were setting up the trust structures, when you were protecting the assets from me, did you know it would end up like this? With me working for you, learning the business properly?" I considered the question carefully. I hoped it would, but I was prepared for the possibility that you'd walk away forever and never speak to me again. "What would you have done then?" "I would have run the company myself until I couldn't anymore, then sold it to someone who would take care of our employees." I paused. "But I would have missed you every day for the rest of my life." Wade's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry I put you through that. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting me." "You didn't make me choose," I said. "You chose what kind of son you wanted to be. I just made sure that choice had real consequences. And if I'd chosen differently, if I'd kept fighting you in court, then you would have learned that respect can't be inherited or stolen. It can only be earned." Wade nodded slowly. "I think I'm finally starting to understand that." As we packed up to leave the office, Wade turned to me one more time. "Mom, yes, thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. For showing me who I could become instead of just accepting who I was." I smiled, thinking about the long journey that had brought us to this moment. "That's what mothers do, Wade. We love you enough to let you fail, and we love you enough to help you succeed, even when your children call you a burden. Especially then," I said, "'cause that's when they need us most." 6 months ago, I thought I was losing my son. Instead, I'd found him, the real him, underneath all the entitlement and assumptions. The man Harold and I had always hoped he'd become. It had taken losing everything for Wade to discover what mattered. And it had taken risking everything for me to save the relationship that mattered most. As we walked out of the office together, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not the moment you prove you're right, but the moment everyone finally understands what was worth fighting for.